Okay, hello everyone.
Hi.
I'm Fabio, this is Bianca, we're Briefly Alps. Thank you, Claire, for inviting us to today. We're really excited to be here. We have been working together as Briefly Alps for 10 years in different parts of Europe and the Middle East, trying to develop and establish a politically and socially engaged design practice, and mostly coming from a graphic design, communication design background, working with those kind of media, and about 1 year ago, in the framework of our current research project, we decided to move back to northern Italy, to the Valagharina district, which is the part of Italy where we are from originally. So we decided to say stop to this kind of gig economy way of lifestyle of the creative industries and go back to where we're originally from and try to establish our design practice there and try to see how that, what we have learned maybe in other contexts makes sense in that kind of context, and how we can develop a long-term kind of engagement with the space, with people who live in this place. And this long-term engagement is really revolving around notions of the commons and community economies, and we try to see how these two frameworks can interact and productively produce ways in which practitioners like us can involve other people in thinking about the commons and trying to create new commons. Maybe there's an idea behind that. So we would like to contribute to the symposium by sharing some reflections on the commons while asking ourselves what points of orientation this framework can offer to socially and politically engaged cultural producers and activators, as many of us are here in the room today. And we have been fascinated by this framework for some time now, and this is because mainly we think it provides a very fertile ground that welcomes experimentation. We come from a very practice-based background. We are designers, and so we're very much interested in how we can activate theory in practice, how we can create practice theory relays in which one enforces the other, where you can go, you look at theory, you go into practice, and then you go back to theory, and you reflect about your practice, and in this kind of going on. No? And so we think that the framework of the commons and commoning allows both for a questioning of the present and the development of concrete proposals for desirable futures in the here and now. I mean, Stavros was speaking about prefigurative politics. This is something that really interests us in what we do. And for this presentation, we will start from some definitions of the commons, commoning, and community that inspire us. So in a way, continuing what Stavros started, maybe adding some points to that. We'll propose how to look at them also from a critical post-humanist perspective. And we will conclude by briefly presenting two projects in which we actively activate long-term collaborative engagements with the areas that we live in. So this is very important for our practice, how we can engage actively with the different contexts in which we move through. And this by starting off some of these ideas around the commons. So we are very much inspired by the writings on the commons and commoning by autonomous and feminist Marxist thinkers. For example, Massimo De Angelis, Silvia Federici, George Cafensis, and people from the Midnight Notes Collective. Peter Leinbau and David Harvey, who is not David Harvey, there's a slight difference in how it is spelled. But they see commons and commoning as a material and social/practical dimension that empowers people to cultivate other values and ways of relating to each other, and who will add also to nature, than the ones embodied and reproduced by capital. And this as a means to the creation of an egalitarian and cooperative society. So the commons are not considered as a means, as an end in itself, but as a means to create desirable, just futures in the here and now. So for Silvia Federici and George Cafensis, what we should aim for in the long run is the establishment of a new commons-based mode of production. By bringing together the many struggles around the world in which commons are created, defended, and fought for. And also De Angelis, we went to one of his presentations recently, he really stresses the importance of today creating and trying to look at what brings the different struggles for the commons together in order to create a movement of the commons. This is very much needed for him at the moment. So how can we look across difference? How can we look at what Stavros was saying, translatability, and how can we create a common ground of communication between commoning practices in different parts of the world that are either struggling with enclosing drives of capital, as Stavros was saying, where crisis is really evident, but also people who are developing these projects and initiatives in places that are not crisis-riddled yet, or at least are not. There's not this very evident conflict yet. And for Federici and Cafensis, present commoning initiatives are the seeds or the embryonic form for an alternative mode of production that is currently in the make. And so we find this very exciting as practitioners, really. But they also add that in a world that is dominated by capitalist relations, the commons we create today are necessarily transitional in form. So reading all this theory, it's very, sometimes very idealized and very inspiring, sometimes also quite reductive in a way. No? When you go into practice, it becomes very messy. So we need to always keep in focus that what we're doing at the moment is necessarily transitional in form. We live in contradiction. The frontier between capital and the commons that De Angeli talks about, what capital has already conquered and what is yet there to be conquered by capital, crosses our bodies. I mean, and so this is something that needs to be recognized when we go into this theory in practice. So more specifically, and looking at the practical dimension of the commons, not as something that is already there for people to use or capital to exploit, but as something that has to be constantly constructed by people coming together and commoning on a daily basis. The commons are defined as a social system in which resources are shared by a community of users and producers who also define the modes of use and production, distribution and circulation of these resources through democratic and horizontal forms of governance. So we can imagine the commons as kind of a stool that is erected by three legs, and we can't think or pretend that the stool is standing if we take away one of those legs, no? As some of the theorists who write about the commons think could work. No? So this is kind of the perspective that De Angelis and friends really talk about. And so we'll just go again a bit into the definitions that we really like about community, for example, as a web of direct relations among subjects whose repetitive engagement and feedback processes around common interests allow them through conflict and or cooperation to define the norms of their interaction. And commoning as these practices of constant democratic and horizontal negotiation between the members of this community around the terms of access to, but we would also add production, preservation, distribution, and circulation of the resources this community, these people that are part of this community hold in common. And Bianca will talk a bit more about the idea of resources and how we can read that from a critical post-humanist perspective. So Federici and Cafensis say there can't be no commons without community. De Angelis adds that there can be no commons without commoning, and we would add very humbly that there can be no community without commoning. So this really speaks against an idea of the global commons or a kind of humans as a community where there lacks this direct way of engaging constantly commoning between people. No? So I would hand over to Bianca for this.
Oh, that's really loud. And in our work and thinking about what the commons can do and how we would want to imagine the communities that we work with, we started to think that it's quite important to us to see community not only as made up of humans, but to think also of more than humans as being included in the communities that we live in. And I think it's something that for us has become quite important once we moved back to Italy and we live in the Alps now, in quite rural spaces. And it seems such a reductive way to think our community of just being made up of humans in there. And so in thinking about community this way, we also started to question this notion of the resource, because very often we have this idea that there's human society and then there are the resources for us to be used. And at this moment in time, it has become clear that it's very problematic to think that the world is at our disposal. We're actually very much in interdependence, and how we can tackle this possibly also in projects that are not just community gardens or projects where the more than human other is very present. But at the moment we're trying to establish a social print shop in the area we live in, and to think also there of how does this actually connect to the environment, to all the other species that are inhabiting this space with us. And at the moment, it's something that we don't know how to answer, but something that keeps us very alert in what we do and in the effects our work creates. And so on the one hand, the questions raised around community are also very much about the power relations we enter into. And once, as practitioners, we start to put projects into the world, what kind of power relations does the commoning that we're proposing strengthen or weaken, or how are they being transformed? And what does it mean for an art and design practice to start commoning and to create relations that would be just between the humans involved, but also the more than human assemblages that one mobilizes? And finally, how to common with the more than human? And is this relevant in all spaces? How can we deal with this? And in thinking about the commons and cultural practitioners involved in engaging with them, for us it's very much important to think of the commons and their creation and their enclosure as an ongoing process. So something that is very dynamic and where we have a role to play, if we want or not. We are involved in either enclosing or defending or enlarging a common. And in a way, it's very empowering to think that it's an ongoing process and that commons are bubbling up around us. And also that this frontier that Fabio was talking about is running through us, and we can negotiate at what time in our life we want to be commoning and in what other moments we actually can't common, because maybe we are in some shitty job or in a position where we need to function in modes that are actually counter to the commons, I would say. So where the way we need to function is formulated around values of competition, individualization, or profit, and sometimes we simply can't escape that. So we're always in this messy terrain of contradictions. And I mean, this question for us is important to keep on asking, what is our role in negotiating this frontier? Because very often as cultural practitioners, we set out with these grand ideas of what fantastic commons or commoning activities we want to be creating. But then actually we're sometimes making things, especially as designers, look too smooth, too chic, too appropriable. And it's really trying to understand what can our position be there and how can we negotiate it in much more politicized ways of being aware what effects we're having in the world. And this actually then brings me to talk about one project of practice, something that together with Orsalia Dimitriou and Paolo Plottiger, we initiated in the neighborhood of New Cross in South London. And this was basically us being students or tutors at Goldsmiths College, reading about the commons in theory, in class, going to lectures, conferences, and being very fascinated by these concepts and by the worlds the theory would help us to picture. But then actually think, well, what's happening around us? Are we commoning in any way in our neighborhood? And how can we start to act as commoners? And so it was trying to go outside the university in self-organized ways and starting activities there around the commons. And so in 2013, we began to run bi-weekly activities in the neighborhood, which ranged really from walking reading groups, going to read these texts outside in this rather deprived neighborhood and see what reality would actually do to our discussions and to the texts. Trying to go to see people coming together, gardening, living on houseboats, just trying to see what is already there happening in this reality, which we actually sort of fantasized about in reading theory, but always thought that, in this deprived neighborhood where we just come in as students or workers, and then we leave in the evening not so much is happening, and to really have this shift of becoming much more active in that. And so we started mapping processes, workshops. We produced at the end of the first year a publication to wrap up that kind of process of studying, and then going into a next phase where one part of the group opened a space called The Field as a community resource center. And so now, since about mid-2014, this community resource center is being run. Of course, it's lots of tensions running through it. What is this? Are we gentrifiers? What's going on? And the New Cross Commoners still keeping this kind of almost like university outside the walls kind of activities going on. And I would just hand to Fabio for another 4 minutes to talk about what we're doing in Italy.
Okay, so as one strand in our current research project around commons and community economies in the Vallagarina district, is what you see here. It's in the Alps, it's in the region called Trentino. We started an exploration into the history and present condition of the common lands that still exist in this part of Italy, as they do also in other parts of Italy, but maybe especially here. So historically, because of the mountainous conformation of this territory, these lands have been of particular importance for the subsistence and survival of the different communities of people living in the Alps. And today, more than half of the whole region is still defined as usi civici. It's basically it's the old concept of the commons. So the history of these lands and the events that led to their present situation is quite complicated from a historical but also legal point of view, so I won't really delve into that. But let's just say that today, from a legal perspective, the people that live in a certain municipality, whose territory maybe holds a certain portion of common lands, and so this is, for example, the municipality of Mori, and what you see are these common lands, which is about more than 1,000 hectares in that case. So these people have the right to access and use a variety of resources that can be extracted from those lands, such as fire or construction wood, mushrooms, stones, food for animals, like grazing animals, and so on. So in a way, these lands are caught in a strange legal situation, between a pre-capitalist economy, in which entire communities, as I said, relied on them for their subsistence, and today's condition in which only a relatively restricted group of people actually accesses the material resources that these lands produce, and generally only to integrate another kind of economy that is more or less collocated in like a wage labor economy and so on. And this is mainly firewood, as you can see in the image on the back. So it's quite a common practice that families put themselves together, put their resources together, go and cut wood that has been assigned to that specific family. So today, on one hand, these municipalities are, who don't really know a lot about the law regulating these common lands, which is fascist law, and it's very complicated and very lacking. It doesn't really protect these lands from enclosures. So municipalities are, on one hand, pressured by the cuts of austerity, and then they tend to easily give in to enclosures by essentially privatizing portions of these lands. For example, by allowing large wine producers or other companies to plant vineyards on them. So you see these jagged structures in which private property is perforating commons, the commons. So, and on the other hand, there are small producers like wild herb and mushroom pickers, etc., that are trying to establish small economic activities on these lands. But always in the view of the so-called Italian word bene comune, the common good. It's not the commons as part of a social system that was revolving around the commons. It's always seen kind of as a resource to be used by people. So the main problem is that people are generally unaware of the existence of these lands. So what is really hindering a process in which maybe new commons can be created from these resources is actually the lack of information and the very complicated legal aspect. So we put ourselves together with a local, one of these small producers. She's an Ethiopian cheesemaker and shepherd who is actually grazing her sheep on one of these, no, her goats on one of these common lands. And she's also a social scientist, so she's really interested in this issue. And so we put ourselves together. We organized a conference. We organized a follow-up workshop in which we deepened some of the aspects, like the mapping, how to access the information, how people can organize legally in order to take care of these common lands instead of the municipalities. So basically how people can protect these places. And now we're working on a publication. It's really interesting because the group that came to these events was very diverse, both in terms of background. It was young people, old people, people who studied, people who have kind of family that was actually using these common land. And so there's something there, and we would like to construct on this. And so it is, again, kind of a long-term process in which we try to study and then look for ways in which to actually build something more concrete from the knowledge we produce together with others. So this is kind of the final thing, yeah? Thank you.
Thank you.